Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the single largest bank in the United States just stepped into a financial trap. It's so sharp and so unexpected that every analyst, every regulator, and every trader who spent the last decade believing they understood the silver market is suddenly speechless. Why? Because the rules that kept the entire system stable for 40 years just broke. Right now, the physical world is colliding with the paper world in a way that cannot be undone. For the first time ever, the vault doors of the global banking system are being forced open. Not by regulation, not by oversight, but by pure mathematics. A market that was supposed to function quietly behind the scenes is becoming the center of the biggest potential commodities squeeze since the 1980s. And that story begins with a date that traders will remember for decades. December 3rd, 2024. This was the day JPMorgan could not escape the delivery clock it built for itself, and the day the silver market stopped obeying the old rules forever. On that December morning, something unprecedented happened. JPMorgan received notices forcing delivery of more than 5 million ounces of physical silver. This wasn't a normal transaction. This delivery could not be rolled forward, it could not be cash settled, and it could not be ignored. What makes this moment so powerful isn't the amount of silver itself, but the signal it sends. You see, the COMEX futures market has always relied on one sacred assumption, that traders will choose dollars instead of metal. For 40 years, that assumption allowed banks to sell enormous amounts of paper silver without ever needing to provide the real bars. This created a convenient system where 95% of all futures contracts simply vanished into cash settlements. Only a tiny fraction ever demanded real metal. That sliver of physical obligation is what allowed banks to treat silver like a fractional reserve system, promising delivery to everyone while knowing almost no one would actually show up. For years, JPMorgan mastered that game. They didn't just trade silver, they operated the vaults that controlled the flow of physical supply. That gave them the ability to shuffle metal between internal categories to create the illusion of abundance, even when real inventory was dangerously thin. This sleight of hand worked flawlessly until a global banking regulation quietly reset the rules. That change was called Basel III. While regulators marketed it as a post-crisis stability reform, few noticed one small technical shift that hit the precious metals markets like a time bomb. Unallocated metal positions, meaning paper claims on metal that might not exist, were downgraded from top-tier bank assets to low-tier assets. Suddenly, the mountains of derivative contracts based on silver that was never physically stored could no longer be counted as high-quality capital on bank balance sheets. This forced banks to confront a reality they had avoided for decades. If they want to keep selling promises of metal, they now need real metal to support those promises. And no rule change, no lobbyist, and no legal loophole can reverse that requirement. From the moment that regulation fully activated, the silver market began transforming from a paper-dominated system into a physically constrained system. And that is exactly why $59 per ounce became the breaking point at the end of 2024. At $59, the entire economics of mining shifted. Producers who spent years selling silver through exchange channels suddenly realized that industrial buyers were willing to pay premiums for guaranteed deliveries. This made direct sales far more profitable than supplying COMEX inventories. This created the first pressure point, as miners began withholding supply from the traditional exchange routes and redirected bars toward manufacturers of electronics, solar panels, and electric vehicles who cannot function without physical metal. These industrial buyers aren't speculators. They don't care about chart movements. They care about securing raw material for next year's production lines. When prices crossed that $59 line, procurement teams across Asia, Europe, and North America triggered emergency purchase programs. If they failed to obtain silver, their factories shut down. And the cost of missing output targets dwarfs the cost of paying a premium for metal. While that was happening, a second pressure point exploded in Asia. The Shanghai Exchange began offering higher spot prices than New York, which created a simple arbitrage path. Buy metal cheaply from COMEX vaults, ship it to China, and sell it at a higher price. That drain quickly stripped more than 4 million ounces from Western inventories and set up the third pressure point that would prove fatal to JPMorgan and the entire short side of the silver market. The combined effect of miners withholding supply, industrial buyers, panic securing material, and arbitrage draining inventories created a perfect storm. More contract holders finally realized the truth. The metal backing their contracts might not actually be there. Once that realization spreads, the rational response is immediate. Take delivery now before the vaults run dry. And that is how JPMorgan's inventory, which once peaked near 50 million ounces, collapsed below 9 million ounces in less than 2 years. Now, every bar they deliver to satisfy a contract just accelerates the depletion of the physical supply that backs hundreds of millions of ounces of paper promises. This is where the math becomes brutal. The total open interest on COMEX represents more than 860 million ounces, but the amount of registered silver meaning deliverable metal, is only around 28 million ounces. This means there are roughly 30 claims for every 1 ounce that actually exists in deliverable form. Historically, this imbalance remained hidden because almost nobody demanded delivery, but $59 broke that pattern forever. Now, if just 3.5% of contract holders demand metal, the entire registered inventory disappears. The December 5 million ounce delivery request was the first sign that we are crossing that threshold. At current delivery rates, COMEX vaults could run out between March and May of 2025. As inventories fall, delivery demands increase because everyone rushes to claim metal before it disappears. It's essentially a bank run, but the withdrawals are silver bars instead of cash, and here is where the trap becomes inescapable for JPMorgan. They cannot simply move eligible inventory into registered inventory without signaling that they can't back other positions. That signal would trigger even more delivery demands and accelerate the collapse. They can't rely on miners to replenish supply because miners are increasingly selling directly to clients and bypassing the banks entirely. And they cannot rely on regulators to save them because Basel III is international banking law, not a COMEX rule that can be amended in an emergency. This is what makes today different from the 1980s squeeze engineered by the Hunt brothers. Back then, regulators protected the short sellers by blocking new long positions and forcing liquidation. But today, regulators cannot override Basel III without triggering global compliance violations, and no central bank wants to risk that. Even if they could, silver is no longer primarily an investment metal. It's a critical industrial resource that powers solar energy, medical devices, electronics, aerospace systems, and electric vehicles. The modern economy needs silver more than ever. When industrial users realize inventory is evaporating, they will not wait for financial markets to adjust. They will buy whatever metal they can at any price because their businesses depend on it. And now the question becomes, what happens when the world sees that the largest bank in America cannot deliver the silver it promised for years? The answer is a repricing event unlike anything this market has ever seen. JPMorgan knows this. That's why their most recent regulatory filings show two dramatic shifts: a rapid reduction of paper derivative exposure and a rapid accumulation of physical metal. Banks do not acquire thousands of tons of physical silver unless they foresee a structural break in the paper markets. JPMorgan is signaling that break right now through their own actions and through quietly worded legal disclosures where they admit that delivery demands may exceed available inventory during periods of market stress. That's corporate language for we might run out of metal. And once those words appear in official filings, you know the storm is real. Banks don't include warnings like that unless they see a cliff approaching. From here, everything becomes about mathematics and the timeline. The available inventory is shrinking at a measurable pace. The pressure points pushing delivery demands higher are structural and permanent, not temporary disruptions. If registered inventory falls below 10 million ounces, which is only weeks away at the current speed, the entire market shifts into scramble mode. At that point, prices no longer move based on charts or technical patterns. The battle becomes about who can secure the last remaining physical bars before the vaults hit zero. Industrial users will outbid investors because their production lines cannot function without metal. Sovereign wealth funds are already exploring physical allocation to protect against currency debasement. And retail investors are waking up to the reality that paper silver does not guarantee metal. When these groups collide, there is no equilibrium price, only a vertical repricing event. Analysts will debate whether the top of that spike reaches $100, $150, $250, or more. But the number itself matters less than the mechanism behind it, because that mechanism is already locked. The regulatory structure, forces backing industrial demand, is soaring supply as constrained inventories are falling, arbitrage is draining metal eastward, the miners refuse to refill the vaults, and the largest short seller in the world is being forced to deliver metal they no longer have in abundance. In this kind of setup, the final price is set not by traders, but by the last desperate buyer willing to pay anything to secure what remains. And now, for the most important part of this entire story, the part everyone wants to skip but cannot ignore. You should never treat this as investment advice. This is not a call to buy anything. This is not a prediction for your portfolio. This is an analysis of publicly available data, regulatory reports, inventory numbers, industrial demand projections, and the historical behavior of commodities under stress. What the data shows is that the old paper system is cracking under the weight of new rules and new demand forces. The institutions that once controlled the market dynamics are now fighting to stay ahead of the physical constraints they never thought would matter. The trap that JPMorgan engineered is no longer theoretical. It is unfolding in real time. The mathematics of this system are converging toward a point where physical reality overtakes paper abstraction. When that moment arrives, the people who assumed silver would always be abundant will discover that the vault doors are nearly empty. And the people who understood the hidden mechanics will realize that a 40-year cycle has ended and a new era of physical price discovery is beginning. The entire global financial world will have to adjust to the consequences. Thanks for watching.